Well, I think we can go ahead, Ben. Uh, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our sixth and final presentation of the NACUSA conference. And today we have Ben Kapp with us today, and I think he's got some interesting ideas about acoustic ideas and the development of musical structure. So Ben, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you, Greg, and thank you everyone for coming. Uh, it's been a cool festival. The bits that I was able to catch so far, so I'm very pleased to be able to participate. And thanks to everyone who's put this on and has allowed me to come and talk about my piece today. My name is Ben Kapp. I'm a composer and performer, and I currently live and work in Olympia, Washington. I've been affiliated with the Evergreen State College and performed music there with the ensemble on and off since about 2010 or 11. I've been involved with music since I was a teenager. I played in a lot of punk rock bands. I played loud, fast, aggressive music, which I would play in the car with my parents, and much to their delight. And they would tell me things like, how can you understand this? How do you understand what they're saying? And to me, that wasn't even a question. It was, well, it just is what it is. And I take it for that. And I started college at Evergreen, and I was exposed to all kinds of music, and in particular, music of the Second Viennese School, so Arnold Schoenberg and Anton Webern and Alban Berg. And I started bringing these things back home to my parents over the summer breaks. And there was one time I had a wonderful argument with my mom when she said the same exact thing that she did about my punk rock music. It was, how can you understand this? How do you even understand what they're saying? It's going by so quickly, and what's the fun in this? And I found that that same response really interesting, particularly because this music was even older than punk rock music, which I thought was kind of the edge of music. And to hear classical music be even more bizarre and sort of pushing the boundaries of what's familiar was a really exciting thing to me. And once I realized that if you sat down and sort of wrote these things out, you could compose music as unfamiliar as this. That sort of pushed me towards experimentation in art. And as a listener, nowadays, I still really do enjoy pop music that communicates itself very easily, like through melody and harmony, and traditional ideas of beauty and good songmanship, something like that. But I also find that I do need these musical experiences which explore sound and structure in a deeper way. And I find that these kinds of musical experiences keep me really present and active as a listener, where I'm actively trying to discover what's going on, and trying to make sense of something that's not really giving itself away very easily. So as a composer, I bring that with me, and I try and think about myself just as much as a listener, and try and think of what my piece can teach me as I'm working on it. What things do I need to listen to, such that I can learn things about the material in the piece that I didn't know before, and that can sort of keep that adventurousness and that unfamiliarity alive for me as a composer just as much as a listener, and hopefully can sort of invite a listener to experience it in that same way that I find it exciting. Something particular about this piece was and is a fascination with using text in a piece, but not using text in a traditional sort of text setting way, a la Schubert songs or something like that, or any other kind of song. I was lucky enough to get to perform, I got to see a piece by Kenneth Gaburo called Maledetto, which just totally blew my mind. If you've never heard of it, It's a piece for seven, I think seven performers that are all speaking. There are no instruments in the piece, but I had never experienced a piece that was as interesting musically as a string quartet or something like that, or an orchestral piece like the Schoenberg piece I had heard before. Um, this piece really opened my ears to the possibility of using words and text as music, um, and also that you could evoke contexts, different personalities, different types of people, and within one piece, you could evoke multiple types of text that evoked certain contexts within one piece, um, and that you could perform the same or even new and different compositional techniques to language, the same that you would do with music. So things like augmenting the phrase length or changing rhythms, um, but also you could disrupt and distort the text, break open the texts, and to combine them with different texts, and sort of shake up the familiarity we have with language in the same way that Schoenberg disrupted the familiarity with tonal music. So just a little bit of history, and then I want to play this piece. I started working on this piece in 2019, and the piece I wound up with was not the piece I had initially started working on, and I'm sure we're all composers here, and we know what that's like. But this was more of a pragmatic sort of result, where I had an idea for a piece that was for 11 people, the Evergreen Ensemble, basically, plus any other friends that I could get to join us. But due to the sheer size of the material, I didn't have enough time to get everyone together to learn this piece for a performance that was coming up. So I said, well, okay, then I just needed to do it for myself and Arun, who's in the room, to perform. So I scaled down my scope of the material, and I wound up with a 7 or 8 minute sort of microcosm, or sort of a window into what this piece was in my conception of it on paper. So the idea of chromatic limb was something that's sort of developed. First, because I like the idea of this metaphor of a piece that had limbs, and what it would mean acoustically to have these sort of autonomous parts of a whole, and how would it be if they function together but remained their autonomy. And I coupled it with this word chromaticism because I thought that was kind of an interesting coupling, where I would try and develop a scale or a degrees of these limbs, so that they would kind of change their character, their nature over times, but still remain what they were, or maybe they would change throughout the composing of the piece. So that question was kind of alive for me when I was conceiving this. And now I think I'd like to play the piece. So I'm going to share my screen. And what unfortunately is going to happen because of sharing through Zoom is that there's going to be a lag between the audio and the video. So if you find it as distracting as I do, just avert your eyes and try and listen. Hopefully it's not too bad. It seems to be a little different each time.
Ben, do you have your sound shared?
Ah, no one is hearing anything.
No, I don't think
Okay.
so.
All right. That's par for the course with Zoom sometimes. All
Yeah.
right. Let's try this again. If you don't hear it again, just say something.
No, I'm not getting
Okay.
any sound.
All right.
There should be a
Um,
little box down in the left corner that you check. When
yeah,
you,
I
that,
did. Um, it may be a audio thing with my computer. I just have to remember how to get there.
yeah. In checking that, that should share any sound your computer is making.
Yeah, it should. I wonder if, because I usually have to change the channels that I send it through.
Oh, okay.
Um, if I've done something, let me share screen. All right, let me try this. My apologies. I did not foresee that. Well, we'll jump to where there's sound. I'm not sharing anymore, am I? Can you hear anything? That's really
No,
weird.
no, I'm afraid not. Can you possibly send me the YouTube link you're using? Put it
Yeah, I
in the
can.
chat, and I
Yeah.
can see if I can get it.
Yeah, let's try that. So there's the YouTube link, and it's at.
Okay, just give me a second here,
Sure.
and
If you go to 2642.
damn, let me to my browser here. Okay, now I'm going to have to, I think, find your piece here.
Yeah, it's at 46 minutes and oh, not 46, my bad. 26 minutes and 42 seconds, something like that.
Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, now just let me share my screen and share sound.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Greg.
Are we getting the sound?
No, now I'm not hearing any sound. Nope. I do hear some sound, but it sounds like it's coming from the laptop. Do you have the sound share sound turn on?
Yeah.
It looks like you do. I think Zoom is having. I think it's in Zoom within Zoom.
Is anyone getting sound? I've got it turned all.
Yeah, it looks like most don't have it. It seemed like Charles Rose heard it fine, but he may be the only one. Jeff suggested listening to it and then coming back, which I'm more than happy to do. Um,
Whoops. Ah, sugar.
I'll just post it again in the chat.
Did they talk about it?
Someone said that.
Okay. Merle, you need to go. Merle, you need to get back. Things have just officially gotten
Maybe Jeff is just a little bit. He's got one of those. Jeff. Hey, Merle. Go!
Hey, could you guys mute yourselves, please? So, if you've watched enough of it, if you were able to finish it, that's great. And if you weren't, for the sake of time, we'll just continue going, in spite of our Zoom technical difficulties. Before we watched it, I mentioned that I started with a much larger piece, and that was for 11 performers. And what you just watched was for 2, or maybe 1.5, you could even say. And I meant it as a larger piece in that it had many different kinds of texts in it, all of which that I wrote. So it was much more ambitious in terms of material. These 4 texts, one of which was the poem, what I call the poem that you just heard in that piece. One of the texts was a dialogue, many different kinds of dialogue between 2 or more voices. A dictionary, a type of speaking that was like a dictionary, where something like a Greek chorus of voices would define words that are within other texts in the piece. And then there was a fictional story that would be read throughout the piece, or at some point in the piece. So the more I worked on that piece, the more I realized that with all of this material, it would take a long time to make this piece. So for the sake of having something to show an audience, I distilled it down into a duet, and took only one of the texts, the poem, and my aim was to explore the poem more closely. And I gave, since Arun and I are both guitar players, I'm much less of a trained guitar player than Arun, which is great for me. I gave us both guitars and brought in some of the original instrumental ideas for the guitar, just the guitar to play. But speaking of the text, I'd like to focus on just the text that we heard and talk a little bit about that. So the piece is called Chromatic Limb, Life Cycle, Life Cycle being the name of the poem. The name is a description of the cyclic structure that I gave it, which you heard at the beginning, where you'd hear a line read and then a new line added, and then that line, the first line would be read, that line that was just added was read, and then another new line was added. So it's this A plus B plus C, A plus B plus C plus D sort of structure that I created for this, which happens, you hear it throughout maybe the first half of the piece. So each time a line is spoken, all the previous lines have to be repeated before a new one can be added. And I think of this as kind of the opposite of a serial procedure, where the whole tone row has to be played before a new one can be added. It's kind of the inverse of that. So this was something that ran through the old piece, and which I brought out of that old piece. I plucked that text out of its context in that piece and tried to do a smaller version. You hear it's hard. It is a poem. I call it a poem, although it's not Robert Frost. It is a collection of statements that seemingly don't build up towards something, and that's an intentional compositional choice in the use of this text, was to structure a poem where the sentences don't consecutively fit with one another. So I intentionally tried to make them oppositional, so that there isn't this kind of through narrative that's built up over time. So rather than a linear narrative, we get this kind of zigzagging narrative, I'm thinking of it as, which are these odd sort of dreamlike descriptions of a person, whoever it is, in their environment. Let me just show a bit of the score here, just to make that example clear. No, I don't want that. I want the desktop. There it is. No, not the whiteboard. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah, Ben, if you can click on it, it should open it up in something.
1 second. I know what it is. There we go. I have to have it open first before.
There we go. Okay.
So here you can see this pretty sparsely notated piece of text, which leaves a lot of the room for the performers to explore. And that was one of the things I was looking forward to in writing it down was actually performing and trying to figure out the best way to deliver this text. But for the most part, the thought was a normally spoken sort of poetic reading. And you'll notice in the performance that Arun and I both took a different approach to that. But the point at hand was that this is statement A plus statement B. So the other person reads the additional statement that's added. I have to have all of these open. Let's see. So as it keeps going, I'm almost there. Not this one. Yes, it is this one. You see the sentences continue to be added. There are also differences in the style of the sentence. There's these kind of first-person statements. There's these non-person statements. There are lists. Just a list of change, but the last word is fire. So there are all these kinds of obstructions to keep an overarching narrative from developing. So something to talk about in general about the piece is my philosophy as a composer. That I really enjoy when a piece begins in one place and ends in a different one. So what I want when I compose is to develop a process of change over time, where the material develops in some way or another towards either a new relationship with the other material in the piece, or towards a new kind of behavior or a new kind of structure at the end of the piece, just to arrive somewhere differently, to witness a growth and development over time. So that happens in this piece, where the interactions of these large sections are slowly cut down into shorter and shorter pieces, but never fully integrated. So there's an idea of the separation that leads towards a not quite a mixture, but a closeness that's not there in the beginning. So these glacial gaps between just the guitar music playing, just the speaking, become narrower and narrower over time. So this idea of separation became something that I thought of as maybe the musical idea of this piece. And this is it mainly at a larger structural level, where it's clear there's only guitars playing right now. Oh, here's a poem. Wait, now there are bits of voice and vocal sounds. So there's a very stark separation on a larger scale between the music and the voice and eventually the vocal sounds, which sort of replace the dominance of this poem that's being read. And these things rarely ever occur simultaneously. So in addition to being separation in general, there's degrees of separation that I thought of between the guitar and the text, between the guitars themselves, between each voice, between each of the statements in the poem, between the speakers and the text. And that one's interesting to note because so the speaking voice and the text are kind of alienated from one another, since there is a single text that they both read, which contains a single I, a single subject. It's not we wake up early, it's I wake up early. But yet both Arun and I are saying that. So who is the I is a question that sort of hangs there for a listener. And who is the I referred to? One of us or both of us, or a person that's not there? So there's a separation there. There's also a separation between the text and the voice, where suddenly the voice arises as its own kind of entity. And there's a separation between the sound of the speaking voice and the text, where now this voice is making vocal sounds rather than just speaking text. So these vocal sounds are now this kind of gray area between speech and music, where they burst out in these streams, or they perform in strict rhythm with one another. So speaking of the nature of the music in general, I'd like to talk about the guitar music, and then how I think of the vocal sounds as music. The music and music played by the guitars and the vocal sounds themselves don't follow any kind of traditional text setting relationship, where the music is meant to express the imagery of the words. And this is mainly because of the way I structured it, where the guitars never happen with the poem. So one's first thought is maybe, well, is the guitar music a commentary on the text? And I think you could think of it that way, but my intention was that the instrumental music sort of follows a theme or a metaphor of its own, which is mentioned in the text, but is not something that's like carried on throughout the text. There is another kind of separation where oh yeah, okay, so this is interesting to notice. Another kind of separation, sorry, I have to pull it up first, is the separation of a tonal context from its usual place. Oh, no, there it is. My apologies. This is the composer performer score, so it's not a this is not a finely tuned engraved score. But what you can notice is these sets of pitches: C, E, B flat, A flat. So it evokes a kind of major minor mode. You have a B flat and an A flat. There's C minor. There's an E major. So you have these kind of hints of major chords. Where's the one? Here you have a B flat or an E flat major chord in the second version. There's the B flat, the E flat, and the G. But out of the context of a tonal piece, I can hear it sounds kind of tuneful, but to me it doesn't evoke the same sort of melodicism that I think it would if it were not in this piece. One last thing to note about the guitars in general is that I'm being sort of disobedient to this idea of separation, in that I have the guitars almost are kind of one voice. They're kind of one instrument played by two people, or you could think of them as like a super guitar that consists of nylon and steel strings. The vocal sounds, you can see that they are here. Oh, sorry. Here's this piece. Oh boy, it's hard to see. That's this one. So these vocal sounds, you can see that they are also a separation from the text as I took all of the consonant sounds out from the text, and these sort of are like a filtered version or a replacement for where the text would normally be as these things proliferate and multiply throughout the piece. And they have their own kind of musical behavior, since I again didn't assign them strict rhythms. And as a performer, it is kind of this impossible task to say a lot of these phonemes, especially when there's a whole string of them very quickly, which is a fun and kind of something that keeps it really fresh to come back to, is to try and do is this sort of impossible task of coordinating all these consonant sounds. So one final thing, and then I'll talk about we'll take some questions if there are any, is I laid out all of these rules for things that I didn't allow in the piece. I didn't allow the sections to fully integrate. I didn't allow the guitars to play and speak at the same time. I didn't allow the voice to be accompanied by music. I didn't prescribe rhythms to the vocal sounds to allow for a more complex or more loose interpretation of their rhythm. But there were just a few moments where I allowed myself to disobey the rules, which is a fun part of my composing for me, is to lay out a system and then have a moment in the piece where you kind of break it or you disobey what you've set out. So the last thing I'd share is this one. So earlier you saw all those consonant sounds without rhythmic notation. So here, if you remember in the piece, there's this moment where there's a ping-ponging of just the T and the F sound. So it's as if these consonants are sort of suspended in this moment where they're doing this sort of dance, this very strict dance together. The last thing I'd like to mention is just that this piece has shown me that it wasn't just that I had a lot of, so I arranged this piece for 2 performers because I had a lot of material to work with that was too much, and I also had not enough performers. But what I've realized upon listening to the piece that I did produce is that even what I thought of as this very small segment of the piece is its own world that I could even dive deeper into, and that is maybe the one of the bigger things that I'm walking away with after this piece, and it's something I'm considering as I continue to work on it and attempt to make the piece that I initially started with. And that is all I've prepared today, so I'm happy to take questions now. So Jeff writes, I'm intrigued by your original conception of 11 instruments and or voices. Could you go into more detail? How many poems there were, what instruments and voices, how different or like the non-narrative aspect of the reduced piece? Are you still interested in finishing that version? If and why not? Yeah, the last question, I certainly am. And even preparing this lecture and analyzing my own work again, which is a really helpful thing to do, but also very difficult. I've recognized that as much as I need to pay attention to the breadth of the work and the inclusion of all of these different things, I also need to pay attention to the huge world that exists inside of just working with one text and a few sounds on the guitar, and to not neglect that sort of scale. Could you, the instruments and voices, so before there were there was just this one poem, although it was dispersed throughout a much larger piece. So what I had composed so far was the sequence of texts and the order and the manner in which they would disrupt each other. And this was generally done by mostly writing in words what would happen. I had ideas for music, and I had pitch material and a lot of pre-compositional things for the instruments to play, which were trombone, cello, percussion, piano, and guitar. So like a quintet that would sort of be like a solo. Well, I thought of it as another limb. So yes, it would interact with the voices in some ways, but much like this piece, it was also a kind of autonomous limb in this organism. And the idea of non-narrativity was also there too, although it would have existed in different degrees. So the poem had its own internal non-narrativity, but it also would have been broken up by it is, because I did write it out, broken up by how I mentioned earlier, this dictionary choir that were a group of voices that would take one of the words that were spoken in either the story or the poem or the dialogues and give this long protracted definition, or a strange a definition from antiquity. So I looked in old dictionaries and found very strange definitions for older definitions for words that were very strange and funny and humorous too. And I think there was some kind of general theme to the nature of their dictionary choir's readings to things, where they would always relate it back to tree sap or other kinds of themes like that were in other texts. So there's this kind of like woven interconnectivity between all of these different texts that I had to break apart to do this piece. And yes, I am looking forward to returning to that again. Yeah, thank you very much. I liked them too. That was maybe the most fun thing to figure out working with the text. I know we're about 8 minutes from reaching an hour, so.
Ben, do I understand that this text all come from one source, or maybe you could review that?
Sorry, which one?
Well,
the one we heard today?
Yes, or I mean this larger piece that you're working on. Were these texts coming from different sources, or?
No, I certainly thought about that with the story, and I did start writing a story that was just a completely different description of just this kind of fairy tale that was sort of about mountains. Mm-hmm. But the fun for me was writing all of my own text, so I didn't take text from anywhere, and I wrote the poem and the dialogues, and because I had to make them as distinct from one another as possible, and I certainly could have done that if I had found things too, but I also enjoyed writing them myself. But that is a good idea. If I wanted to add more text, if I wanted to increase the variety of things to work with even more, a found text would be interesting, I think, amidst all of these texts that I'd written, to have something starkly different that doesn't sound like my writing. Mm-hmm. Arun.
So, sorry, Greg, was there somebody else?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, one big difference that interested me from playing it to listening to it had to do with how the sections that were only from the guitars and the section that were only with the voices, it seemed like time moved at different speeds in those two sections. the sections with the music seem to be much faster than the sections with the text. They seem to move much more slowly. How do you think about time in composing your work?
That's a hard question. I don't completely know the answer, and that's okay. I think I tend to forget how long something takes to happen, or how long things need to happen for. And I left a lot of the spoken parts in a more open sort of form because I don't quite know the answer to these questions. But it is interesting, and yeah, I've noticed those things too about the guitar. Part of it is just because I think there's maybe less guitar music than spoken text. Though I haven't timed it, I can't be sure. But I don't know. I'll continue to think about that.
Thanks.
Ben, do you have any plans for just any other pieces, maybe working with this kind of concept, but just a whole different piece? Or is there still a challenge of finishing this particular?
Well, this one has been sitting around so long that I really need to. I did start working on it again.
Oh.
The two things were, the coronavirus really disrupted things, and it's unclear when I'll get enough, when everyone can get together to do it. So in addition to that, I've been learning a lot more about composing electronic music, and I'll be attending the Charlotte New Music Festival workshop for Max MSP, where I'll have the opportunity to write a piece for either the saxophone performers or a string quartet, in addition to live electronics. So I will be put through the trial of doing that in a week's time or whatever. So maybe the next time we talk, I'll have a piece like that, and hopefully the rest of this piece I can bring to the next conference or a future conference. But also, in addition to experimental music, I do love to write a good pop song. So I have a lot of songs saved on my computer for my bandmates to hear whenever we can also play again.
Well, do we have any other final comments from anyone, or? Okay. Well, I think hearing none, Ben, I want to thank you for your presentation, and it gives us all some new things to think about, I think. And best of luck on continuing with this piece and maybe discovering some new ones.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening and your kind comments, questions. Thank you. Zoom applause. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I think I'll say goodbye to everyone and thank you for attending the presentations, and we'll look forward to next conference and maybe some other ones.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay.
Good evening.